Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Perceptive Podcast here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. I am Josh Beister, and for this episode, we have another indie developer interview lined up. My guest is the developer over at Righteous Hammer Games, who has just released their game ZOR, Pilgrimage of the Slorfs on Steam. We played the demo of it, I think it was like 2 or 3 Next Fests ago. It's old time, seems to be meaningless. But he is on to talk about the game as well as his background. So please welcome to the cast, Clint Jorgenson. How are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure. Thanks for reaching out and one for the press key for the game and having interest in coming on.
Yeah, no, I'm subscribed. I've watched some of your shows, so it was definitely a cool thing that I wanted to try.
Mm-hmm. And as I always say for any developers watching us right now, if you are working on an upcoming game or want to talk about game design with me, definitely feel free to reach out. DMs are always open and all that great stuff. But yeah, like I said, I played the demo to ZOR. This would be, well, quite a while ago. And for people watching us right now, either live or watching us recorded right now. That's my catchphrase right there. But for those of you watching this right now, the game is available on early access as we speak. So we will certainly be talking about that. I'm sure a lot more over the course of this cast. So, since this is your first time on, Clint, I always give developers a chance to talk a little bit about who you are and what is your background when it comes to game dev.
Yeah, so I'm Clint Jorgenson. I've been Righteous Hammer has been going since 2015, so I've been going for like 7 years now. And my record before that was I was at EA for 13 years. Worked on various titles. Def Jam, Fight for New York was my entry point, and then worked on an SSX, the Skate series, another SSX, and then Plants vs Zombies: Garden Warfare. And then before that was born in 1974, and so I grew up in the era of 8-bit computing, just the dawn of computers. Everyone was super into it. So yeah, I was into kind of hobby game dev when I was a kid, like in the 80s. That kind of fizzled for a while, but that's definitely my roots is that era where BASIC and Apple IIs and Commodore 64s and stuff.
Yeah, and definitely a very interesting list of games on your portfolio there. I know you also worked on, was it a Solitaria? I completely butchered that name as well.
Yeah, it seems to be something we do is name things in a way that's just out of pocket. No, but Solitaria was our first game, Righteous Hammer game, which was very mobile focused. It is on PC. It's good on PC. But that was a lot of the design of that was definitely based on a person on a mobile phone in portrait mode, sitting in the dentist's office, killing time, that kind of thing. So ZOR is very much a pivot to more my roots in like PC strategy gaming, deeper, more kind of in-depth stuff, and hex gaming. That's actually another piece of my background that's not really career, but I'm just a huge like hex board gamer. Like, I don't know if GMT Games makes a lot of like these historical kind of heavy card-driven games. Probably the most known might be like Twilight Struggle. But yeah, a lot of that has been an inspiration for ZOR as well.
And certainly a lot that we can discuss tonight. I guess, like, to start off, I guess one question I want to ask you, with working on both, like, Plants vs. Zombies, Garden Warfare, and Skate, two, like, very different games. Of course, Garden Warfare being, like, complete 180, that I think a lot of people, like, never, like, I remember when it was first announced, people were like, what the heck did they do to my tower defense game?
I don't know how much time you have for like a huge anecdote, but that whole kind of process internally at EA was kind of an amazing arc, because everyone felt the same way. Like on paper, I felt the same way. Like to set the context, like Skate 3 ended, and it actually like it sold well and everything, but by EA standards, they shut it down and they moved people to new teams and stuff like that. So I ended up I actually almost got laid off at one point because there was like nowhere to go, and then I ended up on the SSX reboot. I did the front end UI stuff for that, and actually took a step back there because I was like doing certain art direction things and presentation things. I was like back to my roots. Let's just do UI, nothing else. And then after that project, I heard some former producers and devs on Skate that I knew well and respected and like loved working with were working on this Plants vs Zombies thing. And going into that, like I'm a huge PopCap fan at the time. Like I mean, I still am, but it's obviously changed. But I was a lot about their creative direction and novelty and innovation. So I was kind of jumping at the chance on one hand, but then on the other hand, it was like, well, EA's bought PopCap, and on paper, the idea of like Plants vs Zombies shooter, it just sounds so. It almost sounds like if you made like a parody of what EA would do. That's it, right? So, but I knew all these people really well, and I wanted something new to work on. It was so I went and checked it out, and it was like within 5 minutes of looking at a few concept art and pictures, and just like it just clicked. And like it was kind of like a Team Fortress 2 direction more than some cynical weird like shootery thing. So then I got excited just because there's all these possibilities of like pea shooters and crazy like just weird weapons and weird game mechanics, and so it just flipped 180 to be it's kind of feeling cynical about it and then incredibly inspired. It was definitely that was one of those teams that was like I've been on like 7 or 8 projects at EA, and like when it's things are good. Like Skate was all cylinders, everyone inspired. It was you could tell you knew something special was going on. Actually, at Def Jam it was like that, and then on Garden Warfare it was like that as well. Like just super fun. So yeah, the funny thing was though that internally, so we were just this tiny team doing this experimental game that still had to be greenlit. Internally, there's 1,000 other people on the campus, and they felt like the cynical thing because they'd never seen it. They just heard about it, and it was almost like we were the weird kids in high school, and people were like, "Oh yeah, you're working on the Plants vs Zombies shooter game, huh?" Like they like actually thinking of like as an insult or something, or like something to be embarrassed about. And we know how cool this thing we're making is. So finally, a year later, we reached the point where we presented it in this all hands type of meeting where people were showing the progress on the different games, and this was like the rollout of the game to a bunch of people in the studio. Like I think there was like 500 people in the stadium or in this like a amphitheater. And when it started up, I think it's one of those expectation things, right, where people were expecting me so bad, and it was so good. Like I had like goosebumps. That was probably one of my biggest moments in game development, was that feeling of just validation and satisfaction and pride of just what we had created, and just you could feel in the room like a pin drop. People were like, "Oh my god!" They were just realizing that it was a really cool thing. So, I mean, in the end, it turned out. I left the team after the first one, so I'm not sure. They made 3 and they had varying kind of success and approaches, but so I just think more creatively than business. But yeah, creatively that was the kind of a really cool moment. So yeah, anyway, that's a huge long story, but that it's kind of fun to be a part of that arc, I guess.
Yep, and with like that, like redesign the game to be like that, like, as you said, like with like the whole team like being in alignment as to like creating a game around this concept. I think that's a very important point because it could have turned out to be, I think, as a lot of people have thought, like a very cynical, like the Call of Duty parodies that a lot of people like try to make fun of. And
Absolutely.
it does take a very creative team, I think, to make something like that work. And I guess as a good segue into that, like with something like with Skate. Like Skate was another game that I found very fascinating. As someone, I'm sure like a lot of people watching who grew up playing the Tony Hawks and that kind of stuff, Skate
Mm-hmm.
was definitely like that next evolution. I know there's been this kind of chase among like indie developers or like the last decade of who could create like the next Skate style game. I know there's that one, I keep forgetting the name of it, that I think was Kickstarted. And I know there's been like like is this like the skiing version of Skate? Is this the I don't know? I think there was like a BMX version of Skate and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely was kind of inspirational and genre. Yeah, it evolved the genre for sure. I mean, I think in the DNA, like in both those cases, when I show up on the team, I'm UI, presentation, kind of creative, general stuff, plugging into the team. But there's so like Skate in the DNA of Skate, there's what made it work and what made it special was the combination of the actual Skate people that were on the team from day one. Like Dan Chung and Chris Perry and Jay Bomber. Like these guys are like live and breathe skates their entire lives, right? So it's so legit. And then combined with a production team that believed in it and everybody gelled. And then from there, I guess it's just carefully picking the team to have harmony, have people that believe in the project. So I kind of came on after its inception, where they had figured out the Flickit system and the vision was starting to take shape. And so my role in it was just to jump on, user interface, but then that kind of bleeds into certain other branding and creative stuff. And yeah, it was, it was like a special thing that doesn't always happen, I guess. And Placer was always the same way. There was, uh, you know, Brian Lindley and Justin Weeb, who was the creative director, and a handful of other, really great developers from Skate. They had that vision too, where just a few different people on the project early on, and it might have just gone off the rails right away, right? But they knew what would make this work, and the team was really small, so like that was another great thing. Going from a team of 100, and as soon as the team starts getting to 100 people, it's really like factory like, which can be fine if the vision is dialed, but to start off, and we were a small scrappy kind of team of like 20 people. That was a really nice change as well. And I think important to get, you can't really discover a vision with 100 people all competing and arguing over stuff. Like you need that kind of set in place, I think.
Hmm. And I keep seeing like I just looked it up. I think I found the game. I mean, it was Session is the like indie version take on that, and like with
Oh,
the
okay, right.
whole like control or like the flick system using the
Mhm.
analog stick. I guess any like insight or any like story of, like how that came about, like how that was like defined for skate.
It was definitely like, well, actually, it's an interesting story. I wasn't there at that time, but it's kind of legendary where one of the things that EA culturally at the time, because this was, way back like 2006, right? Or 2007 or something. So culture was completely different. And what there used to be is this culture of everything is about the visuals, about impressing the execs with this big like video and all this stuff. And everybody who was like a designer, engineer, just had that sense, and we're constantly arguing for you can't, that's not the right way to make a game. You need to build it from the core out, which nowadays is, you know, it's just 101, right? But back then there was a lot of like different influences. And so Skate managed to somehow, like those guys I mentioned, like they somehow convinced EA to greenlight this project based on the proper way of development, which is from the core outwards. So the Flickit system at first was, from what I understand, was just a prototype where there was no game. It was like and these guys are all like hardcore skaters, so the way you move the stick would just read out on the screen what was happening, and to get a feel for those things. And they actually iterated on that for a while to get it perfect. Um, which is crazy to think at EA, a place where people would spend a month on a crazy video. I forget they had a name for the video. It was kind of silly, but and then to present somebody with just this like control scheme and vision, and they must have sold it amazingly because it's but that's the right way to do it. So but yeah, so they started with that, and then there was this for a while. It was called the blue box man or whatever, but it was the game was very minimal blocks physics based for a super long time before committing to real art. And we would all play it, and the feel was great. Like anybody who had skateboarded before right away was this is really cool. So it feels like intuitive, how you use your feet mapped to the stick. So yeah, I wasn't part of any of that stuff, but it's definitely like a legendary story of the team. So
And you mentioned a few minutes ago you were working on the SSX reboot, and that's like another franchise I remember growing up. Like, you definitely have touched a lot of games that I remember, like in that
yeah.
very like weird era of EA when they were really trying to do like a lot of, I wouldn't say experimental, but they're definitely thinking more outside the box with some of their titles. And like SSX, Skate, Def Jam, another really interesting example. These games that were really trying to like, I think, differentiate themselves from their peers in the respective genres.
Yeah, no, I can't say like Def Jam was the first project I was on, so I was like a kid, kid doing action script in the closet in the corner and stuff. And by the end of the project, I became more involved in the team and everything. But I guess at that time there wasn't this like really prescriptive genres that have to be a certain way, and it has to make $1 billion or forget about it. Like I definitely that's something that kind of crept up over my career there. Um, as the hits got bigger, and because it's when Def Jam was out, I think that was probably more of a hook, was doing something new, or doing there was still sequels and franchises, but yeah, there was a lot of experimentation, and then I think it probably a lot of it stopped just due to the thing with experimentation is 8 out of 10 times it doesn't work out sometimes. So I mean, Def Jam did. I mean, it's still funny enough, like it's still appreciated. Like I see on TikTok rarely these live streams, and I saw a guy playing Def Jam streaming it on TikTok on my feed, and I was watched for like 10 minutes. And I was like, because that project was amazing too. But yeah, it's interesting because yeah, the SSX stuff was an example of where it didn't turn out great. Like I was on the SSX on tour, and then I was also on the reboot. I think it was like 2015, or was it 2018? No, yeah, it must have been 2015. But anyway, those were an attempt to take the genre in a new direction, and then there's backlash, and there's this tug of war between satisfying the existing fans and pushing into a new area and doing something new, and it just creates. It's a tough thing, I think, to do. I'm not on the business side of this. I'm not really involved, but that's my perception of it, I guess. 'Cause-
I mean, the talking about like trying to keep the fans happy and do something completely different. I mean, that's another like hour, I think, easily to certainly talk
yeah.
about.
Oh no, I could go on forever. So, I mean, even just like as a UI person at the time, like even just technology increasing quickly is something that we don't. It still happens, but there's like being able to use Flash for a UI, and it was in an era when motion graphics was like exploding, where like MTV and commercials started having all these crazy motion graphics, and it was like a new thing, and like so everybody wanted the games to start feeling like that. And when I look back at the way UI was designed in that era, UI stuff, like I cringe because it's by today's standards of like, user experience, making things clean, clear. We were just kind of going crazy with the art, more like almost irresponsibly back then. But then people liked it because it was novel. So Anyway, like yeah, some of it doesn't hold up, some of it does, depending on what it is. But
Hmm.
um,
Yep, and I think one of the biggest like trends about what we saw with the independent space in the past decade has been that push into experimentation. That idea that you don't need to worry about what a publisher or shareholders are going to say about your game. And I mean, we can just sit here and start naming many of the indie games over 10 years that have gone on not only to become huge successes, but they've kind of like define either subgenres or be the benchmark for other games to rise up to.
yeah, it's a fascinating thing that I don't yet understand. I think like there's a luck component,
Hmm.
having the perfect hook, the having a following is so huge now. It's almost all that matters now. Like even when Salterica launched, there was still this traditional PR process of sending emails out and trying to get articles, and then we did, which we didn't do great at, but whereas now it just you can see the pattern is YouTube, Twitch coverage, stuff like that is what moves the needle the most. So it's a different thing, but yeah, when it comes to the on the innovation side, for sure, like that's why we left. That's why I left EA and did this was um, because I just wanted to do more experimental, creatively fun and risky things for as long as I could. So because being a generalist at EA or any AAA company is tough as well because you just really only get to do one thing. So,
Hmm.
I like to program, I like to illustrate, I like to design games, I like to do
Hmm.
everything. So, it was a kind of an opportunity to do all that stuff. And I think that's what the motivation of a lot of the indie stuff probably is just, the ability to just that creative freedom and autonomy. But I don't know, it feels like it's changed though. There's definitely more chasing trends like now than perhaps like when I first left EA. It was way more of a madhouse of just all these crazy new ideas, and you still see that a lot. But there's definitely these like kind of indie genres that come up and define things for a while, and then collapse, and something else comes up in its place. Like the whole Slay the Spire phenomenon is an example. Zora gets compared to that, and it's funny because I just don't. It's nothing like it. It has cards, like it has cards, and you manage a deck, which yeah, for sure. But it's so defining that um, people see cards, and then it's like the immediate comparison. So
Oh yes, I mean, again, you subscribe to the channel, so you know that I have spoken a whole lot about the roguelikes and deck building roguelikes and that kind of design, and yeah, it's definitely one of the I think hardest aspects. I think this is one area where indie developers tend to have problems with is the idea of kind of like breaking out from these established genre definers. How many
mhm.
games have been called, is this just like The Binding of Isaac? Or this is just like Spelunky? Or Stardew Valley likes? And Darkest Dungeon likes as well. Like,
Yeah,
I meant to say like there twice, but everyone gets the point that when we have these genre defining games, it becomes, I think, that much harder to show to someone, hey, yes, this has cards, or this is procedurally generated, but it's nothing like Darkest Dungeon, or nothing like Slay the Spire. And I think a lot of that challenge also comes in with being able to market the game. Because, as you're well aware of, I'm sure as the audience who's watching this is well aware of, indie game marketing is very challenging.
yeah, you telling me? You're telling me, like, yeah, that's honestly like when I started this, it was like, yeah, I love developing, I love creating, and I love the way these things turn out. I'm tinkering in the garage. The part of the job that you have to do, which is just hustling constantly for attention, um, has been really tough for me. Like, especially, my background is like, I was just like a weird kid that had no friends in school, and like, and just it feels like almost this high school thing all over again, where there's like the cool kids and they've got like a million followers, and then you're constantly comparing yourself, and it's kind of almost toxic, but it's necessary. You have to think about that stuff. So I definitely struggle with the marketing side of it. Like I have fun with the part where you make a trailer or chat, show the game, but the hustling for views is brutal. Like it's really tough, and it's really time consuming, and it's really, depending on the type of person you are, can be you know a mental health issue too, right? Because some people are just naturally
Yeah,
like magnetic, right? So anyway, but it is what it is, and it's certainly a better opportunity than these things not existing and everyone has to work for a AAA company, and it's all about fighting for the spot on the shelf on Walmart, like it was when I first started. So yeah, I'll take this any day for sure. But yeah, the other frustration too with the genre defining stuff, and it can be also like art style. Like I always cringe when, because I like to go at things from a new angle, and there's these ideas about, well, this art style means it's a mobile game. Like you see that comment all the time online.
hmm
It's got a mobile art style, and it's, well, what does that mean? That's so, like, so narrow. It's so narrow. Like I just those kind of like constraints always bug me, I guess.
Yeah, and I think what's very funny about that is that while I was doing my research for my free to play and mobile design book, a lot of like the current generation of mobile games, they look very much on par with console and PC titles. I mean, if you look at a game like Genshin Impact, for instance, like you could easily put that next to something like any third person open world game from a AA or AAA studio, and I think if you didn't know those names, you couldn't tell that was made for a mobile interface or a mobile design.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, probably a lot of it is just backlash against like cartoony art, maybe
Mhm.
by a certain person with a certain taste. But yeah, and I mean, sometimes it those kind of preconceptions or categorizations of things can be limiting and frustrating, though, for sure. Like the Slay the Spire thing's a perfect example. Like I'm a massive fan of that game. Played the crap out of it. I love that whole thing. But when I think of deck building, it's like I think of Ascension and Dominion. I think of like board games from 10 years ago, and like ZOR, the inspiration of ZOR. There's so many things plugging into it, like always. But the bigger inspiration is probably board games like that GMT makes. Like they're really heavy, but just the idea of the card-driven tactics stuff is something that's heavily explored for decades in the historical game space, but in a way heavier and accessible way. So yeah, but it has an impact too on people's experience, because that's the other side of it. Um, when someone plays a game like Zor, and they're expecting, because in Salt or Slay the Spire, there's a lot of depth, but at first, I mean, you can just you're chucking cards at the screen and having fun, blowing up the units, and then you kind of get into the depth of it. Um, Whereas if you expect that experience, from something more tactical, then it could end up being like an expectations thing where it feels more frustrating. But if you didn't expect that in the first place, it would be fine. So it's something I think about sometimes. Is um,
Yeah, and I've
when you're
seen.
when you're sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, finish your thought.
I was just gonna say, like, it's the risk of novelty, essentially. Like, the more novel you are, the hard there isn't something for people to kind of like hang on to, and so but then derivative stuff starts getting boring after a while. So it's I don't know. I think about it now because I'm seeing all the reactions and stuff. But when I'm working on things, I don't think about it as much. I just have an idea and a vision, just kind of go for it. But anyway, sorry, I'm just kind of rambling. But what were you gonna say?
like with regards to like people coming in with certain expectations. That is something that I've seen a lot, especially when I'm looking at a lot of indie games, especially those that aren't. I would say they're kind of like on like the mid tier side. They're not the ones that people never hear of. They're not the ones that blow up as the next Celeste, next Slay the Spire. And I always see like on the forums, oh, you're just ripping off so and so, or did you steal from this and this? The whole right now, of course, Vampire Survivors like is really exploding for this year, and of course,
Mhm.
like every forum for a new one, you will see at least 5 comments saying, "Did you just rip off Vampire Survivors? Hey, this game is like Vampire Survivors. Did you steal from that one?" And
Yeah.
it is, I think this is, I think, one of the biggest challenges, and something that, as someone who covers indie games, I've tried to fight against, is trying to explain to someone why this game is different. Why, this one game that's a Vampire Survivor style is different from this one, which is different from this one. And how, just because a game has cards doesn't mean it's automatically a deck building roguelike, like Slay the Spire. But
Mhm.
it's that kind of like double-edged sword, because we see from a lot of indie developers, I'm sure you've seen this as well, that on their store pages they will of course say what their inspirations are, what games they want to build their game like. And if you say, oh, I was inspired by Slay the Spire, Darkest Dungeon, whatever, that automatically will clue some people in that, oh well, must be just like those exact games, so that there
Mhm.
is something different, or this is Slay the Spire, but that but is what people will then start complaining about. But then of course we have games that really, I think, to the mainstream, they really came out of nowhere. Like Inscription, Disco Elysium, even going a little bit further back, like Shadow Tactics, that kind of like commando style game. That all of a sudden, like, I'm curious, like, as any developer, like, what are your thoughts on, like, there's definitely some games that just feel like it's like one day they don't exist, and then the next day, it's everywhere. Like, it just like birthed into being around the mainstream.
Yeah, I don't it's honestly like, I totally know the phenomenon you're talking about. I can but how what the criteria for that happening is definitely a mystery, like but I think one thing that these things do have in common is novelty, innovation, like, everything is derived from something. There's no, pure innovation, but people have a sixth sense for, like, what's derivative in a cynical way and what's truly, like, inspired or really taking things in a new creative direction. So yeah, like all these games start, all these genre defining or important games start as a risk, as a taking a chance. Darkest Dungeon is a perfect example where I still remember the very first time I ever saw that was just like a Kickstarter popped up or something, and just really thinking the art style and the voiceover was cool, and I don't think there was even much gameplay at that point, and it was just the first taste of it, and it's these things they just did something really cool that nobody had done, but it wasn't necessarily like the exact mechanics or the exact genre. It was just the way those things came together. They just did it for an inspired reason and not like a cynical reason. And it was like taking risks, trying something new. This is my perception anyway. So I think that's like almost the formula for everything like that. Um, but from the like super business point of view, you're gonna because it's you can't predict that. It's hindsight's 2020. So for every Darkest Dungeon, there's 100 games that do something crazy, and you know just nobody ever hears about it. And for who knows what reason, like it could even be like, hey, if this game came out 2 years ago or 4 years from now, it would have been exploding. And so there's some chaos in there for sure. Um, but yeah, I know what you mean. It's definitely interesting to watch that evolve, and it's often surprising what turns into a phenomenon for sure. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know like we're both on the same Discord with Seth from who does like strategy game reviews and strategy game marketing, and I'm sure like he is probably like ranting and raving right now as we're talking about how hard it is to find like that magic spark. And I think for a lot of developers, it does feel almost like you're just shouting to the shouting to the void and hoping that someone responds. And like again, like you follow me, my audience obviously follows me. They know that I cover a lot of small indie games. Like I have covered games that have maybe had 0 reviews on Steam, or games that have just like they came out and nothing happened, and it is very frustrating to see that. And
Hmm.
we can theory craft until the cows come home as to why some of these games succeed and why they don't. But ultimately, the challenge I think for a lot of developers these days is that it's that always that push and pull. Like as we've been talking about with games that stand out, how far do you stand out, and how much you try to resonate with something? Like trying to build, a Disco Elysium meets Stardew Valley, and create something crazy like that without completely alienating everyone who associates certain qualifiers and designs with those 2 words.
Yeah, and I've as someone on the side of there's like this spectrum of an approach to marketing like let's call it a niche game. And there's all these variables of like if you already have 1 million followers, then anything you do is just gonna be hyped, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if we put that aside and just like you said, the middle kind of portion, it's like there's this kind of spectrum from the perfect hype, the perfect hype machine, where the game the approach to the game is a front loaded thing, all about the marketing, all about the hype, all about getting people's capturing people's imagination. And there's so many different games, but a lot of those you get really hyped on it and played a bit, and then it's like it just kind of fizzles out because it's just disappointingly, whether it's kind of shallow or whatever. But it's there's that approach, which is put all the energy into the hype, and then there's this whole spectrum to kind of neglecting the hype and the marketing considerations and just doing whatever the hell you want. And I'm definitely way more on that side of the spectrum. But yeah, it's from any business or publisher's standpoint, it's they would probably just say it's stupid, right? Like Zor's a kind of an example. You name the game ZOR Pilgrimage of the Slorfs. It's a cartoony art style with like these kind of weird monsters that it's inspired by 80s, dark fantasy, weird stuff like that, with hardcore tactics and deck building inspired by like many different things, but it's definitely like a lot more heavy than someone would expect if they thought they're jumping into something like Animal Crossing, right? So that's kind of like so almost experimental to the it's such a kind of risk to be that experimental and refusing to find the sweet spot where there's something familiar plus something novel. And like I just tend to like to go really novel with stuff. And the same thing happened with Salt Echo is another example of weird name and concept, and it actually started slow, but the word of mouth and appreciation for it has held it up for a super long time. Like I wouldn't call it a big hit, but it's definitely been a healthy, you know, healthy in the middle of the road kind of thing. Um, so it's an approach, but yeah, like as a gamer, I almost have a sixth sense for some of that kind of like that hype stuff that comes out where you're like, well, like um, I'm maybe a bit more sometimes more skeptical when you just see this huge hype train coming into nowhere. It's when something kind of quietly builds up that word of mouth and you start hearing about it more and more, and you're like, oh, this is actually like um, you just get that sense that, oh, this is obviously something special, like something like like you mentioned, like Inscription or any of these recent indie hits. But I don't know. I'm kind of rambling because it's alchemy. Like I don't think anyone really knows what the perfect formula is with the marketing and the approach to things.
Hmm.
It even depends on motivation. Like your motivation might be entirely money, it might be partially money, it might be not money at all, and that kind of plugs into it as well. So
Hmm. Yep. And as you said, it's like that kind of chase to figure out what can make this game pop. Because I mean, we've seen this many times over that just getting that one screenshot or that one GIF in front of the right person can have these games go viral. But
mhm.
on the other side of that, there's always that challenge of, I guess, like, if you make too big of a splash before you have anything to kind of build off of. And this is something that we've seen from a lot of indie devs. I know a lot of people who do marketing know about this. That like once you start marketing, you never stop marketing. Like you need to be in that position where every day, every week, you can say something new. You can do something exciting about your game. Because we've seen games where they get like one amazing day or a week of marketing. Everyone can't stop talking about it, and then they stop talking, and then everyone forgets about the game, and then when it's released, all that marketing goodwill that was built up, it's just non-existent. And for I think a lot of, and I guess this is a question for you as well. Like in terms, like you've obviously with the games you've worked on, they've all had. I wouldn't say like in terms of I wouldn't say being like niche, but they've definitely been very specific in terms of their audiences and their designs. I guess how do you approach like marketing or telling people about a game that's like, yes, it is a third person shooter, or it is a fighting game, or it's a skateboarding game, or a strategy kind of roguelike game, but it also has all this other stuff that is, nothing like those other games.
Mm. Well, in terms of the EA side of it, was you didn't have to think about marketing at all because somebody's just taking care of it. I mean, other than the team having
Mhm.
opinions on how what the marketing campaign is like and etc. But yeah, that's probably like an EA calculation of risk versus reward versus all this data that they're collecting. They also have a machine in place to just advertise and get attention. But yeah, on the indie side, we like Solitaire was very we were pretty naive about everything, and it was we went down to PAX and we got it. It ended up on the game of the week list on Apple. So it actually bombed on Steam when we released it on Steam. Uh, and it's not there was almost no marketing. So, but on Apple, we are on Game of the Week, and then that featuring just gave it enough of a foundation to build on, even though it started slow. Like, um, so yeah, Solitaire marketing wise was actually probably we did a trailer and stuff, but we didn't really. And we sent out PR, but we didn't know what we were doing. And then ZOR, I think the thing with ZOR that in hindsight's 2020, but we announced ZOR a couple years ago with kind of a flawed prediction of how much longer the development cycle would be. So I felt like we're within a year of releasing this thing into early access. So we did a teaser, we announced it. We don't have a huge audience, and it didn't go viral or anything, but you start to feel that sense after like a year where people have seen it a bunch of times. So then it's like, how do we show the next level of this? And so yeah, it's been if I had a time machine, I think the best way if I announced ZOR a week before Next Fest this year for the first time, no one knew what the hell we were doing, and just came out huge, closer to release it within 6 months. I think that's a good way to do it because you're right. Like people, it's if you think about the landscape, it's like there's billions of people on their devices looking at a new headline every second, looking at a new TikTok video, 100 games a day. Like it's an absolute. The numbers are just crazy on both sides. Like how much you're competing with and how many people there are, and it's all mashing together in this mosh pit. And um, so yeah, attention can just go away so fast. So that's why, yeah, I think making something replayable, quality, fresh, showing that you're committed, to updating it, and then just trying to build up that healthy word of mouth and respect for the game and respect for,
Mm-hmm.
that you're not gonna, be cynical about it, or just be really, really slow. And so, yeah, I think that's our approach at this point is um, really just focus on the long game with,
Mm-hmm.
just this. As I still believe, like as word gets out, like ZOR does something that no other game does, and it does it well, but it's unexpected, and it's hard to explain as well, which has been a huge marketing issue. Like
Yeah.
there's because when you see these things, sometimes you think it's a kitchen sink scenario where it's like, oh yeah, it's like deck building, survival, and tactics. That's just throwing the kitchen sink at it, and a lot of times that doesn't work out when people throw the kitchen sink at it. But there's once you actually play Zor for a bit, like I think you appreciate how it fits together. But when you explain it, it might sound like trend chasing, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and what you just said there about trying to like show someone like unique selling points. Like for a lot of games where the uniqueness doesn't make itself readily known within, let's say, 5 to 10 minutes of play, there are a lot of people, we've seen this from streamers, YouTubers, maybe just the general consumer. They will load up a game and go, "Oh, it's just a Slay the Spire clone, uninstall, refund, total playtime 80 seconds." And it's very challenging for a lot of these games that have that long burn. I think we've seen in a interesting way the last decade that I think a lot of developers have moved away from the slow burn approach. That
Yeah,
you can't wait 5, 10, 20 hours to have that big aha gotcha moment. If you can't hook someone within a minute, 10
yeah.
minutes at most, they're gone. And it is very difficult. One of my favorite games of last year, Library of Ruina, it takes like a good 4 or 5 hours before the game's finally like, okay, we're going to let you get to the cool stuff now. And like, it's one of those games that I love it. I will recommend it, but I will say it is slow. And
Yeah.
that qualifier can be enough to just dissuade people. I was just having this conversation with my friend Josh when we do the weekend shows together that there's only so many hours in the day, as you just said. There's only so many games one
Mhm.
person can reasonably play. I mean, I'm drowning in games. I
Mhm.
cover at least 10 to 15 games a week these days. Well, in these stuff that I cover, and I can't cover enough games. So what's the chance that someone who's just watching a general consumer to play every single game of even the genres they like? I mean, we haven't even talked about trying to get someone to try something that they're not familiar with. That's another 5 hours right there.
Oh, totally. Like, yeah, and there's so many different types. I'm like there's so many things I'm dying to get to game wise that I haven't. Like, um, and for sure, like I think everyone's in that boat. And then, but I think, and this ties back to your kind of comments about these kind of things that flare up, and they all have that thing in common where they're doing something new and they're doing it well, and they become part of the kind of they become part of the gaming zeitgeist or whatever you want to
Hmm.
call it. But like, just totally a train wreck there. But sorry, that's yeah, where was I starting with that? I'm sorry. I was trying to tie it back, and then I lost the thread. But we were talking about oh right, not being able to keep up with games.
Yeah.
Yes. So apologies. I get too excited and start to derail myself. So there's also, I think there's like that. There's too much stuff. I'm not gonna try something new because I know what I like and I've got a lot of stuff to do. But I think there's also sometimes people that are very intensely in certain genres committed to them. Like I think there's also a craving for novelty. So that's where I think there's an opportunity, I think, for that is in a genre that, like, deck builder is probably a perfect example. That was actually part of the idea of ZOR was it brings together some of these genres that have maybe started to get stale in some parts, and like, so survival, right? There's just been so much survival. I still love it. Like, I still love survival games. Like, I'm playing Farthest Frontier right now, and so I do like I'll never get sick of that. Deck builders, I'll never get sick of, but you just don't want to play the same thing over and over. So, and then tactics, right? So it's like we took these three things, and every single one, as they combine, it's this huge, fresh new take on it. It's completely, unlike anything. And it kind of it works and fits together. And the hope was, can we draw people in from all these areas? So, the strategy gamers who want something just totally novel, like this new experience, deck people into deck builders wanted something that's a complete refresh on it. And then people who like survival, would they really get into the fact that it's more of a board game style economy and balance, like with small numbers and tough, deep decisions. And so that was the calculus. But yeah, it's just the way that how long it took me to just say that is an issue. So it's no wonder people will do it's like this, but because if that but is awesome, then that's great. Like, I like that. So,
and you, with your discussion of survival and deck builders, you lost me at survival, but you got me back at deck builders. As people who watch me know that I am not a huge survival fan, but it is another very interesting case. I think what you just said there about kind of like that novelty between genres is very important. As some, again, like over the past decade with doing game wisdom and doing more in terms of I guess I'm now quote unquote influencer or whatever the kids are saying. I get to play games that I probably would not have spent 1 cent on. That it's a genre that is either completely out of my comfort zone, or it is something that it is a risk as a consumer. If I only have, let's say, $60 of disposable income a month, do I spend it on this weird game of genres I've never played before, but let's say, it has a 9 out of 10 on Metacritic? Or do I spend on the genre that, I've played morning, noon, and night, I've owned, every game in it, all my friends play it? And a lot of people are going to go with that latter one. And it is, as you said, the but of when we're deciding these games is such an important factor. And there are games where people go into, as we said, with those preconceived notions of these genres. That, hey, if you say your game's a deck builder, but let's say it's a deck builder that it's all about pre-constructed deck, or it's something more along the lines of Magic, well, then you lied to me and I hate your game. But then you say to someone else, oh, it's a deck builder, but you're telling me I have to build my deck, one card after each round? That's not a deck builder. I mean, that's just a roguelike, so you lied to me. And it's that frustration, again, of how do you market that X factor to someone? Even if they don't know they're going to like it. I mean, look at something like Factorio, I think, is a really good example. Like, if you were to describe a game like Factorio to people, they would probably think it's, you're just doing homework. I'm just making all these machines and they're just, I don't have to touch them, where's the gameplay? And it turned into one of the best-selling games of the last decade. Just by, as you said, like, it's like hitting that perfect zeitgeist of it's unique, no one else is doing anything like it, and it's just a really well done game.
And it's one of those examples of like that game's been supported. It was supported for so long. You got the sense of like jumping in. You know, if you jump into it, there's going to be constantly things added, improved, um, and yeah, there are examples of those games where they do build up with word of mouth because yeah, once like if someone gets sucked into hype, you got them for like a week. And then it's like a candy, right? It's like eating a piece of candy. It's like when it's fast, it's intense, and then it's over.
Yep.
But when you kind of build up that kind of respect and word of mouth for something based on people who've
Mm-hmm.
actually played it a while, and it kind of slowly builds up, I feel like especially for niche stuff, like I'm not going for a mega hit or anything, but I think that's really powerful. Like an example of that I was thinking of is like Battle Brothers, which is super hardcore. Like
Mm-hmm.
I love it. But that game, you kind of I would see one little thing about it pop up here and there, and like, and it's definitely not like a mega hit or anything, but it's like it's done so well in that sense of people love the game, they respect it so much. They'll play it for 2 years, talk about it. So yeah, there's definitely like a power to that. I don't know if you can guarantee it's going to happen, but you do your best. But so I
Mm-hmm.
think yeah, that's what I've been kind of going for with my games is I focus so much more on that kind of long term than the hype. Maybe to my detriment, but it's what I care about. So.
Yeah, and I think that like I am the same way. Like I am definitely more playing the long game. I am the short. And it's how I really structured my YouTube channel and how I'm finally after like almost about a decade now of doing this work. Like it's like finally starting to like see some fruits coming into fruition or whatever the expression is. But the problem, and I think this is something that every developer has struggled with, is that people care more, I think, about the short term. They want to see, the next Goat Simulator or the next, crazy Five Nights at Freddy's style game. They want to see that game that goes from, here to here in a week. And, Steam is very much marketed around that, as anyone knows with the algorithm, that if your game isn't, at least moderately successful within like a week or two, the algorithm's not going to start recommending it. And then if
Mm.
it doesn't start recommending it, it becomes harder for people to know about you. And it is that very frustrating thing because there are a lot of games on Steam, a lot of games that I personally played where I always say that this game should not have 10 reviews on Steam. Like, it should not, this should be, many times more successful on that quality. And
Yeah.
it just doesn't, like we said, it's like that case of, if almost like a pachinko ball that, there's all these holes that you can win, and it just bounces and misses every single one. And it's so frustrating when I see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that's just entertainment, I get entertainment
Mm-hmm.
business in general, I guess, where it's just snowball effects within snowball effect within snowball effect in both directions, and you're just riding that. That's why the pachinko thing is a great analogy for that for sure, because each bounce could be creating a feedback loop in one or the other direction. So, um, yeah, it's definitely like it's just different audiences, different approaches. I think I think there's a certain type of publisher and developer who's going to make the goat simulator type stuff where, and I mean, I'm not even saying that, just games that are just super fun to stream and talk about, and there's just they're designed to be hyped up, right? And they're designed really well for that. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's something like look, say Battle Brothers, where the idea is this is a game that's like a love letter to a certain type of underserved niche customer. and they are going to fucking love this game. Um, and they're going to be so glad that it was made and it's supported, and that it's just going to slowly build this army of people. And it's a, truly kind of niche. But anyone who's that type of person will love that game. So that's kind of, what I'm going for with ZOR. But I think, how it's been criticized is that the issue can be, is that do the different components end up interfering with that at all? So like we've seen people come into it 100% about the art. They're like, oh my God, look at their little feet. It's so cute. And like, that is an awesome thing about the game for sure. And then the difficulty and the hardcore tactics are like, and we've addressed that a lot. Like the goal is not for those people to get crushed. Like I want everyone to fall in love with this game. But so we've had to, we've adjusted to that because it's hard to see that happen. But then on the other side, the hardcore tactics deck builder types who are amazing at the game. Like there's people on Discord who beat it the first time, which blows my mind. Like there's people who can't beat the intro. They've tried for 6 hours. So it's the skill gap is huge. But I guess the point is that those people who are hardcore might initially be put off by like cute, right? They might think, oh, that right away that just tells me it's not a hardcore tactics game. It's like casual. But that's where I think word of mouth can overcome that over time, especially for like a hardcore niche type. Because if something's good and if something's novel, then it's my hope is that word will keep growing and getting around in those communities. So anyway, I'm sure there's a business person out there who's just shaking their head thinking I'm just naive or whatever, but that's how I think about it.
Maybe I should have brought Seth in as a backup here. He can provide the marketing hair pulling out descriptions. But yeah, like as you said, like, and I think this is a good segue in talking more about ZOR, because I know we have maybe about like 20 to 30 minutes, and we should obviously talk about the game that you're working on in terms of, this is the brilliance of like two non-marketers having a talk about a game. But
I love chatting. Sorry, I love chatting. It's all good, man. But yeah, let's get into it. I'm talking about ZOR.
But yeah, like before I get to my question about difficulty, for people watching us right now who don't know what ZOR is, what is, I guess here's like your marketing challenge. What's the kind of like elevator pitch for the game for people watching us?
So the elevator pitch is it's a survival deck builder inspired by tabletop. That's like probably the core of it. Is it's an attempt to fix things that I don't like about survival and things that I don't like about deck builders by bringing them together with a board game design philosophy behind it. So there's it's simple concepts and it's accessible in terms of like in a board game like Agricola, for example. Like there's like a single sheep and a single wheat, and like the numbers and the things are very clear and crisp, and you can keep it all in your mind. But the decision depth is insane. Like the math of it is like exponentially. The more you can just keep thinking deeply about it. So it's that kind of board game design feel that addresses issues with deck building and survival. So my issues with survival were always there's a kind of tediousness to I've got 1,000 sticks and 1,000 rocks and the numbers are high and everything's just endless, and it feels like and then the design is really apparent where there's like here's the bottleneck thing and then here's the 10 things and then here's the bottleneck things, and you're kind of on this path. And then so I just thought small numbers, crisp decisions, and agonizing decisions. Like in ZOR, for example, you find a nut. So everything is a card. So, I've got my hand, it's movement, attack. But then if I find a nut on the ground, that's also a card. And then I can eat it for food, which is scarce, and there's a tension there. Or I can save it and use it to craft. So there's like this binary decision tree that just exponentially grows from the things that you get. Then the deck builder side of it is, I've always felt like, again, this concentrating things down. Having the deck just balloon with stuff, and then there's this idea of deck thinning, which I think people think that's more strategic than it is. It's just like, do I spend like 50 gold to get the 0.4% chance of this and that? Like, I've never really thought that was, you know, or I just thought, I wouldn't say don't think it's great. I love deck builders, Ascension, all those games, but I wanted to see, like, why not just take that out, and why not have the deck builder be more about, the deck stays fairly small, grows a bit, you upgrade things, and you're swapping depending on the situation, and you get more of a feel for the deck that you've built, rather than it's just a bunch of stuff thrown in. The other side of deck builders is, I think, the synergies between cards are all there is when it's pure cards. So obviously the game's designed that way, and there's like, it starts to become, some things start to become obvious, where it's like, okay, I get the cards that give me the armor, then I get the cards that turn the armor into an attack. And it's just really obvious how to combine them generally, and then you get into the nuance later. But after a while, you're like, there's this type of deck, this type of deck, this type of deck. So all of that depth kind of collapses down to some archetypes and some ideas. And so, the thought was, with ZOR, because there's a tactical board at play, hexes, and every step matters, that, instead of the cards having these really obvious kind of synergies between themselves that you obviously collect, they all kind of have synergies with the board, and each map may or may not afford you huge benefits or no benefits or something in between to those synergies. So it's like there's cardboard synergies there. Like, I guess, like, an example would be, there's a card called Nature Hike, where you just get an extra action point for each tree and water around you. So on one level, that could just be these hexes that are, it's just incredible for that card. And then on another map, it's not as useful. And so um, you're designing your deck as a toolbox for how to approach the level, instead of just all about the card synergies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely not an elevator pitch, but that's those are some of the those are the ideas behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like,
And
I love survival, I love deck building, I love tactics, but I want to, like, fix little things about each of them, and
I think that's very interesting. Like, again, like when we talk about deck builders in general, that one of the bigger trends has been that the game is all about the deck, in a manner of speaking. That there's no interaction with the environments. You could be inside a crazy dungeon. You could be, cyberpunk future. It doesn't matter. Everything around you, it doesn't matter. It's just about those cards. And then with a game like with ZOR and some of the more, again, like tactical inspire ones, we
mhm.
have that more like interaction with the environment. And that was one of the things I noticed, and I'm obviously, you should know as a developer about the game, about being able to have like the different kind of movement cards. That's not just, click here, you go there. You have a card that could give you, more movement, but let's say it costs you additional water. Or let's say this is a movement card, but you can end with a 1 or 2 point attack. And
Mhm.
that kind of stuff is more interesting. It provides more choices. And as you said, and one element we discussed yet, but with the maps being procedurally generated, you also have to worry about your resources. This is kind of where the survival aspect comes in. Do
Yeah.
you spend extra turns trying to get that one extra bit of food, but it's going to cost all this water to go from here to there? Or do you end it early, but then think, well, how am I supposed to feed my characters for the next day?
Yeah, definitely. Like, and I really should touch on that right away, because I think that's another thing that ZOR offers,
Mm-hmm.
that takes things to a level that pushes it as, like, further. So in most games where you have a deck of cards and you're manipulating a tactical situation, it tends to be, there's a bunch of attack types, and so the decision is when and where do I use those attack cards with the different characters and their abilities, but it's a purely combat system. And then there might be kind of movement and attacking and stuff like that. But with ZOR, we actually have different card types based on the different things you can target. And there's movement cards that target the Slorfs themselves, and they give you action points, and that's like half your deck. Then there's attack cards, which directly attack, where they target an enemy and directly attack it. And that can be stuff you've crafted or inherent abilities like charging. And then the other thing that we've done that's kind of cool is like a card called Harvest. And that's where you interact with just objects in the world. So you might go fishing, or you might break a rock to get a stone or something. And because those cards are mixed in it, and then there's effect cards, which are one-off effects. Things like you can build a structure of like you can build like a little campfire that makes your food costs go down in an area. So the decision making is there's like a tempo as well, where there's this bottleneck of, well, I've got one harvest card in my deck, and there's like 3 or 4 things to harvest. So I need to plan my routes, but then when do I use my attack card instead of movement points? So I think that's one of the things that makes it special is the card types with different targets and how they mix together in a hand. And you have to like think about the tempo and timing of when to use what, rather than just everything just being action points and cool attacks.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but do the cards have... I forget if this is a game that the cards can have different effects based on who they're targeting. That you could have a card that, let's say, it could either harvest this, or use on enemy. Let's say it does like 1 point of damage or something.
Yeah, we actually like... Well, I don't think at Next Fest we had it, but there was... In the past, there was like this... Yeah, cards doing 2 things, being like split was a thing, but what we found was that it was just adding more complexity, and that just, the synergy between the board and the cards and hand size and the combination was... So yeah, but there are things like that where the context of when and how you use a card is can be a big deal. So the card design is definitely a lot about those synergies with what's going on the map and enemies, like movement cards where you get an action point for every enemy adjacent to you, or like I said about the nature hike thing, things where when I'm using this action card, movement card, I get more food. Like the card is called like foraging or something. So you'll build a deck of these tools, and then you'll be looking at the map and being like, okay, so this source is gonna go this way, do the resource gathering. This one's gonna fight off these dudes. Then they're gonna meet up in the middle, drop this here. Like there's a lot of that kind of like planning and strategy involved. That I think what I've been seeing from YouTube videos is like what has to click, but maybe it takes too long to click because people are used to just very forgiving games where you just go ahead and do whatever you want, but you'll just suddenly find yourself starving if you haven't thought things through a bit. So,
Yep. And with the kind of survival side of it, one thing we touched on, we may just briefly cover, is the crafting. That with all the cards being resources in your hand, there's that extra dynamic of, my hand is starting to fill up. Do I draw one of these items that maybe I can use back at my camp? And I know from the demo, and maybe you're going to elaborate on this a little bit more, that there is this upgrade system, not just for your cards, but to the camp that can grow over the course of a run.
Yeah, so you have there's 2 types of resources. There's some currency resources, like sticks and grass, that are just things you can have as much of as you want. And then mostly the other resources are actual cards, and every single resource card, like whether it's nuts or a branch, has a use that consumes it. So you need to decide first: do I want to save this card for crafting, or do I want to use it to throw a stone at an enemy, or eat the nut to not starve. So then when you go back to camp each night, you can craft using those resources and cards to either upgrade your camp, which is a lot of passive effects, and also unlocking certain unlocking deck slots and other buffs. And then there's actual card crafting where you make new cards for your deck. So I might take that branch. Like if I pick up that branch, I can swing it for 2 damage at something. And with blunt, which could be super useful in the moment, but if I save it, use it, then and I have the right recipe, then I can craft like a hammer. Like if I collect certain things, then I can craft a hammer, which is like way better and permanent in my deck. So there's actually one of the big kind of soft skills in the game is knowing when to just consume a resource and not hoard it. That was one of the things we learned from Next Fest was hoarding is something that's just so natural to people. Like we've all played RPGs, we have 700 potions, and so we actually added deck slots after Next Fest, which not only just to deal with the hoarding situation where your deck was start getting flooded with stuff, but also it sets up this kind of gameplay where you start slotting things in based on um, what you want to do. Because you might have a little scouting information about the next level, and be like, "Oh, okay, I know what that is. I'm gonna slot in these cards because I think they'll be better for that situation." Solitaire does a really similar thing where each battle you have a few slots and you're like flipping things based on the enemy you're about to face. So
I mean,
that's
that's
kind of the idea.
and that push and pull between when to use resources and when you don't is always a challenge of these kinds of games because there's always that kind of difficulty design where hey I use the nut or I broke my stick but now this next level it's an enemy that I can't get close to so I either need to hit it at range or it just kind of decimates me and I think those games can always end up being very frustrating when it feels like there's a very hard way of having to play this game. That if you don't get this, this, and this, you might as well just quit the run. You're never going to win.
Mhm. Yeah, I think there's definitely like in ZOR, there's definitely an aspect of it that is there's unforgiving things in the game that would be frustrating, could be frustrating. It's meant to be played many times, like any kind of roguelike. But there's definitely like no situation I don't think that you can't bounce back from. At least in the long term. Like your Slorfs could be down to 2 health each, and you just have a really good there's ways to recover health, there's ways to fight back. So but yeah, there's definitely like, and I like that about the design is it's about mastery. It's like every time you play you get the satisfaction of getting better and better at it. I guess the key is to not and we're addressing that right now with these patches that we're doing. Like we don't want anything to be so frustrating that it's makes you quit, obviously. Like there's some frustration, but it's something where, oh, okay, I get it. Now, next run, I'm going to do better. And that's, what we're seeing generally. There's a few things that are like, because it's a roguelike with procedural stuff, once in a while, you'll see things come together that you're like, oh, yeah, that's really ridiculous. Actually, we need to maybe make some tweaks. But um,
Mm-hmm.
did I answer that properly? Or,
I think
or did I
so.
miss anything?
It is difficult to talk about difficulty in any kind of game like this, and I think, and this is definitely a topic that may be too big to get into right now, but there's that challenge of how do you work someone through, I think, their first loss in a game. That is a very big aspect of these kinds of roguelikes and roguelite style titles. Is that, if they lose and it just feels like the game was just completely against me, a lot of people will bounce off of that. And
Mm,
it's definitely a challenge of how do you make the player lose and they understand why they lost. That is not
yeah.
just because a lot of people just immediately shout, "Oh, bad RNG, game over, I lost," that kind of thing.
Yeah, and Zora is actually in the spectrum of these types of games is very determined. It's actually surprisingly deterministic in terms of there's no there's very little to no percent chance type mechanics. You always know the outcome of your direct actions. There's a few cases where, and it's always reward stuff where there's like you pick from 3 options or something, but there's no like, I don't know if I'll kill this enemy with this action. You always know, but there is randomness in the draw of cards, the layout of the map. Some of the more like long-term timing things can vary. So, yeah, so we definitely want, if someone dies, there are definitely, what we've seen from people playing is people get better and better at the game, but there's certain soft skills that we need to do a better job of teaching, and putting tips or nudging them in the right direction. Like, just certain, like, one of the things that isn't intuitive at first, just based on expectations, based on other games, is how important the resource management, food, water game is. You'll die much more to starvation than you will enemies. And once that clicks and you're like, I can't goof around running around back and forth, which is actually true survival, right? Like the Long Dark, for example, like even like hardcore survival games, like you walk the wrong direction with no food or water too long and then have to backtrack. That's actually can be a deadly situation. So it's kind of, there's things like that in the game where you wonder how heavy-handed you should be. And we try not to be heavy-handed with, hey, make sure you do this, make sure you do that, constantly nagging the player. But I think the times when the frustration is the worst is when something happens you didn't expect or predict. A lot of times because if you're just overwhelmed with the new game, and then that's on us, because that sucks. It's like, I want things to be clear, not, oh, I forgot that thing was there, and that gust would blew me into this thing and killed me, and I forgot he was going to do that, and those kind of things. So I think that's more of a pacing and UX challenge, just making there's little things that are still hidden information that need to be surfaced, and that's what we're working hard on right now is UX pacing, making sure there's none of those things that feel unfair. Like, if you die and it's difficult and it feels fair, then that's fine. That's the way it's meant to be. But so it's tough though. It's like there's a range of players, like I said, of people who beat it the first time, then people who can't get through the intro, and you have to serve everybody equally and in a way that doesn't take away from one or the other experience. So I think probably like more options, more slow down pacing, but let people choose how they want to play. I think that's probably the best approach. I mean, I don't know. Like, Josh, you tell me, what do you think?
Yeah,
what do you think the best solution is to that situation? The huge skill range.
Seems like every indie developer I do for a cast these days is asking me some like superly difficult game dev question to end the cast on, or like near the end, just to throw me for a loop. But yeah, I think a lot of it's also the UI of the game as well. Like, what information are you giving the player? Because I've seen a lot of games where it's like, okay, yes, the wind is blowing, and let's say there's a fire coming down, but there's no real indication on the UI about it. You're supposed to kind of already know that information is there. And there's definitely that push and pull between how much and how little information you tell the player. Like, for me, I am always a strong proponent of, if enemies have like specific movement and attack ranges, that should be spelled on the UI. Like, don't make me have to click on every single enemy and then try to remember, okay, so he's going to cover these hexes, this guy's going to cover these hexes, so I need to move exactly right here and I'll be safe. And then I forget I move like right there, and then I get killed.
Yeah.
And difficulty, again, I think it's that issue, because as you said, there's already people who have been in the game. That will always happen. Like, no matter how difficult you may think the game is, or how easy you think the game is, there's going to be that one group of someone say, this game is boring. I beat it on my first run. What are you doing? I want, give me like triple food costs, and enemies can one shot me. And then, as you said, there's people who are like, I've been playing for like 5-6 hours. I can't even get past the first boss. What's wrong? Make this game easier. And it's a tough line to walk. And I think, again, like, this is where good UX and good pacing really come in. And I guess as another question, we didn't discuss this. Are there any persistent elements or carryover between runs?
Not yet.
Okay.
The reason we didn't release with any kind of meta progression is I always find it weird in early access when there's progression too early, and then I feel like I've played the game, but then I haven't played the real game. I've only played like the rough version, and I don't mind playing the rough version of the core gameplay because that's what is fun about early access is you're seeing each update. But when there's like meta progression, I just find it weird. So what we wanted to do was just expand on and polish and just absolutely nail the core experience and the pacing and everything. And then do the meta progression persistent stuff as one really good, proper, big update that brings the whole thing to the table instead of, drip feeding these little things. Because, yeah, I've had that recently in a few early access where you're just feeling like why is there meta progression in this game right now? Because I don't know if I want to get achievements and permanent things based on this because I know it's rough and I know it's going to change so much in the future. But I guess you can always reset, but then that's kind of lame as well. So anyway, that's our idea. But it's planned for sure. There's more Slorfs, unlocking new areas, new cards, new content. Just the one line I want to draw is we're not going to do the power progression at all. That's a mistake I made with Solterica, and it just creates this spectrum of I don't feel like I'm playing the game for real yet.
Yep.
To or the numbers are going up, but it feels the same, or like I find that doing things that are more based on there's a whole menu of options and they have these cool things. Like I loved in Hades they use power progression, and I don't necessarily like the first part of it, but then when you get to the end game, I love the part where you're customizing your difficulty with these different perks and settings, and then what you choose determines what rare things you might find, and then you're chasing those things. That's the kind of progression I'd love to see in ZOR. Is more like that. So yeah, it's kind of
and that issue of when you're not playing for the real run, that always frustrates me when it comes to a lot of games that focus on meta progression. That if I'm supposed to be able to play your game, but let's say I can't unlock some kind of game-changing skill or new mechanic until like 3 runs in, then it just feels like I'm set up for failure. That yes, maybe I could win on my first run, but it's that difference of having, being able to do this much versus this much. And then, as you said, with like power progression, the issue with that again is that then it just kind of, I think, really ruins the balance of your game. Because do you balance your game around stats at, level 0? Or you balance it at level 40, 50, 60, and so on? And it is that very tough line to walk, because I've seen developers who've struggled with both. That they'll make it so easy that all the progression doesn't matter. Somebody beats the game and is like, well, that's it, I'm done, who cares? And then the other side, the progression is so gated like that, I have to like die and lose 8 runs just so I get enough resources to unlock, let's say, sword plus 2, so now I have like a 3% greater chance of winning. And I think what you said about Hades, I think Hades is a really solid example of, I think, splitting that difference really well. That you can do a lot in that game if you know what you're doing, but the unlocks simply just kind of like nudge you for it. It's not like, hey, you've unlocked, here's a free damage shield, or here's complete invincibility that you can now throw whenever you want.
True, yeah. It's really smart. For sure, there isn't those hard, like, there's a little bit of it, but it's It's if I went into playing it now from the start, I'd probably do so much better with none of the upgrades than when you're a new player. So there's that side of it. It does help probably with the pacing of a new player as well. But yeah, I think like ZOR in the end, it's definitely a skill game. Your progression in terms of like how difficult or easy the game feels is actually going to change most based on your skill uh, and experience with the game. And that I think that's the best feeling in gaming, basically, when you like get better at something and you can feel it and but you can't just do a one size fits all where it's like, well, we've decided this is the person that the skill is based on. Like, so yeah, I like the idea of there's series of trials that are these like kind of achievements that you get, and then there's also this just a menu of options where you can try different tweaks on the difficulty, but it's not something you unlock in a linear fashion and you're like, okay, if I play the game 7 times, then I'm going to get this thing, and then I'll be able to really play. So yeah, it's
Yeah, but like when the like meta progression or those systems are used to like nudge players forward as opposed to being required, I think that is the better way. There have been several action roguelikes I play where I don't even get like halfway done the unlocks. I've already been in the game. And a lot of that just comes from having that skill or playing the game over and over in early access. So I know everything going into 1.0. But again, if you excuse me, if you bounce a game around someone like me, and then somebody new plays who let's say needs 80% of the unlocks just to get to the end, they're going to feel incredibly frustrated. So they don't feel like, the first 5 hours of this game don't mean anything because I can't do anything.
well, and there's a meta to that too,
Mm-hmm.
which I hate, which is you're guessing what the developer's intent was. So like there's that game there's a game that was a lot like Hades, and it was like this kind of there was these curses.
Curse of the Mad Gods, I believe.
Yes, so I was playing that on Game Pass like a year ago, and the art's great, and I enjoyed it, but it was kicking my ass, and I was like, and then I got into this meta guessing game where I was like, oh wait, is this supposed to happen? And then it's just a matter of I need to unlock all this stuff, and then I start getting better, or am I just bad right now? And even just having to think about that is a bummer because um like what is the intent behind this, because some games are designed like that, like you're purposefully going to be crushed at first until you get rolling. So yeah, that's a good question. So how do you, if that's your intent, make it obvious? How do you make that obvious? Or
Mm-hmm.
but
I looked up. It was Curse of the Dead Gods, not the Mad Gods, just to clarify for
yeah,
people.
that's right. That's right.
Yeah, and I had that same issue too. I made it all the way to like the final super difficult fight, and it crushed me. And this is like a full run. All the areas, all the other bosses, and I never went back to the game after that because I just felt like all the time I just spent to get to that point, and this boss just smacks me back down. Is it a skill thing? Because if it is a skill thing, that means I have to do another hour or two just to get back to that fight to then
Yeah.
learn it. Or is it a progression thing, but then I'm spending hours grinding? And I think there is this nature of wait when it comes to roguelikes. And I know we are just at like 90 minutes, so we'll wrap things up in the next few minutes.
Yeah.
Like weight is such, I think, a hard thing to get across when it comes to any kind of rogue-esque experience. The longer your run is, the more interesting it can be. But then it's kind of like, and I wonder if you've had this feeling. For people who watch us recorded, let me know in the comments that sometimes it just feels like too much work to play or start one of these roguelikes. Where it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to play this, it's going to be at minimum 60 to 90 minutes of my time, and then maybe I'll have a chance at winning. And when it gets to like that, I just feel like I don't want to invest, the probability of having an enjoyable experience. Whereas with a game like a Slay the Spire or the Biome of Isaac, I know it's like, okay, it's 30 to 60 minutes. This is the chunk, do or die, and then we can do another chunk later.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I think that's huge for sure. And even yeah, just there's like the meta grind part of that too, where it's like, well, do I
Mm-hmm.
want to play this for 40 hours before I've got all the cool stuff? And but yeah, that pacing and timing is just something that we're actually asking ourselves about right now. Is what should what is the right length of the pilgrimage run?
Yeah.
Because right now it's there's 15 areas. It's taken it takes like between 2 and 3 hours. Which and then of course there's people who are saying it's too short, people are saying it's too long. So
Yeah.
again, I think it's like maybe you have different lengths, types that options. But yeah, it's a good question. I think definitely on the shorter side for something where you just drop dead eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, having something go on for too long is a mistake for sure. So
Yeah, and then the other issue, of course, when you have those different difficulty settings, is what is the true experience? What is what the
mm,
developers intended, and that is its own painful nightmare to try and get across to the consumer. Because you can tell them, okay, yes, you have easy, very easy, super duper easy, but then you say, oh, but we expect you to play at super frustrating difficulty. I know there are a lot of consumers who will just be like, well, what's the point of me even trying to learn your game on super easy mode when you're telling me that the real game is over here with all this frustration, all the things that annoy me or that I don't understand yet?
yeah, for sure. And that's why we opted to do like a perk system for difficulty where you pick from a menu of things that can either give you a benefit or a burden. And so you can tune your difficulty for sure, but it can also be based on the things that are bothering you the most at a given time. So I keep starving. So you just there's one of the perks is you just have more food, you have more max food, you find more food. It's less of an issue. But the rest of the game is the same. So you can try it that way. Or if you're like really good at the game, and you can start adding enemies, giving yourself less XP and just start. The cool thing about that is there'll just be these challenges that you can make for yourself, which let me try it. Let me try a low XP run with like double the hazards and see if I can make it once you've like really gotten good at the game. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, that's our approach just because I think it's a little more interesting. Like you said, the easy, medium, hard doesn't really tell you much. And
Mm-hmm. Yep. Uh,
um, yeah, I mean, I could keep talking for a
I
while.
I
Maybe this is
can
a good sign that maybe we should do it again sometime. I enjoy been enjoying chatting, man.
Yeah, definitely. I'm always happy to chat. And yeah, if you're free in the future, we are recording this on Labor Day. So we're both like doing work on Labor Day here. So if you are free, definitely send me a message, Discord, Twitter, whatever, and we can certainly set something up in the future.
Yeah, awesome. I really enjoyed this chat.
Hmm.
Hopefully, I didn't ramble. I have a rambling issue, so we'll see.
All right. So to wrap things up, then I guess just like a few quick logistics questions for you.
Yep.
So, for people watching us right now, depending upon when this will go up in recorded form, ZOR is officially out in early access. It was released on August 30th. So, in
Right.
terms of like updates or like what's like on your plate in terms of stuff to add to the game.
Yeah. So we have a roadmap on Steam that is pretty concrete for the first few months, and then gets you know more general as time goes on because we'll adapt to what people are saying. But the first order of business is pacing, UX, bugs, the critical stuff that's causing frustration, causing issues. Thankfully, it's been very bug wise. There's lots of little things, but there hasn't been a ton of really bad. There hasn't been any like bad surprises.
Hmm.
So we got a handle on that. There's definitely UX stuff we're working on, like we were talking about earlier, being transparent with information in places where it's too hidden, certain pacing things to make sure everybody can enjoy the game. Then once that stuff's done, then there's a bunch of content that didn't quite make it to release. Like there's some levels, cards, new stuff, and that we're going to add. And then, it's pretty much, we have a big content patch planned in October that it's going to add a new region. So right now there's 2 regions. So yeah, it's basically frantically trying to like address the most important core kind of bugs and UX tuning issues, and so that we can get to like all the content that almost made it into release but didn't quite make it. So yeah, there's a whole new region, bunch of new levels, cards. Because yeah, I know in these kind of early accesses, especially for the people that are really enjoying the game, like I don't want people to wait too long to have a new bunch of goodies to try out, and come back, keep having a reason to keep coming back, and a new experience. So
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the length, as you said earlier, you're hoping like it's to be like 2.5 to 3 hours. Is that where the length of the run is now, or is that what you're shooting for with the
no,
updates?
that's what the length of the run is
Okay.
now, depending on how fast or slow you play. But so yeah, we're still kind of considering
Mm-hmm.
what the right length and pacing is. It's definitely in the ballpark. Like I don't think it'll be 30 minutes or anything like that, but it's a question of, do you go longer or do you go wider with more variety? And I think we're definitely leaning to more variety, and not making it longer and longer right now.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, there can always be, that's what's great about the perk system is you can just add those options for people. Like if you want to shrink the run down a bit so it's a bit shorter. We don't have that yet, but I think that would be a great thing to put in there.
Mm-hmm. And for people watching us, what is kind of like your estimated time frame for hitting 1.0 or leaving early access?
Yeah, well, our goal is definitely sometime between 6 months and a year. So it's definitely on the shorter side. It's not going to be one of those kind of 5 year long early access things that goes on forever. It definitely depends on, it's the variable is the feedback and kind of interest that we get in terms of, how much will come up that we want to add or change from now till then. So that's the hard part that's hard to predict, but we do have like a plan for what our version would be. So it's just a question of, do people playing and fans like take it in a new direction or add like throw really good ideas in the Discord that end up we spend more time on certain things. So, but it's definitely going to be on the shorter side compared to some early access. That's why we kind of spent a long time on the project building like a solid foundation to build on, where most of early access is actually going to be about content and not, well, we're still, got to do this thing and that thing and it's rough and all these spots. Like, uh, so hopefully, yeah, there's always updates coming that are fun to come back to.
All right. And again, for people watching us, we are recording this just as the game has entered early access, so I'm sure there'll be a lot more to discuss in the future. So, with that, I think we can wrap things up. For you, Clint, do you have any social media, anything like that you would like to plug before I let you go for tonight?
Sure. Yeah. The probably the main social media that we use is on Twitter. We are Righteous HQ. And then we have a Discord, which is on our Steam page, which is getting more active, and we're very engaged on there. So bring your ideas and feedback for sure to Discord.
Mm-hmm. All right, and do you have anything you would like to say to end the cast on, whether it's a shout out to fans, finalizing a design thought, anything like that?
Um, Nothing that pops to mind. I mean, I definitely am really excited about the quality of engagement we've had on Discord so far. So no specific names I want to drop, but just everybody on there I've been shocked by just how great the discussion has been on Discord. with the group that's there so far. So I just hope that keeps growing and developing, because it's gold. It's really enjoyable as well. But
Right. So with that, we are going to say goodnight. Clint, again, thank you so much for coming on, and definitely best of luck with ZOR. And as I said, if you are free in the future, feel free to give me a shout out, and we can set up for another chat.
for sure, yeah, I had a blast. So thank you very much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Not
Cheers.
not a problem. And for people watching us right now, be sure to check out ZOR. There'll be links to it as well as to the social media stuff Clint mentioned in the description down below. By the time this goes up, I should have my play of it up on the secondary channel. And for me, again, do all the liking, subscribing, commenting. There's the Patreon up there, links down below, and all that great stuff. And as I said at the start, if you are a developer working on an upcoming or recently released game, and you would like to talk about or for me to cover it, please get in touch. Again, emails, DMs, and all that are all open. So, with all that said, thanks again for tuning in. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until our next chat, have a great night.